Hi, and welcome back to the Save It for Parts channel. Today I'm up here on the roof of my house to discuss a long-term project of mine which has just wrapped up. For the last 12 years or so, I have been live streaming the St. Paul police radios through this antenna here. This was actually one of my first real ham radio projects after buying this house, and I made this little antenna mount for my scanner antenna. This is an old surplus UHF scanner antenna that I found somewhere. I don't even fully remember where this one came from. And this antenna worked for quite a number of years until it got water in it or froze or something happened, and this one stopped working. So I've actually moved down to this little guy, which works just as well. And I've been live streaming the police radios through one of these antennas here from my house since about 2013. But this month, this fall, it's actually all shutting down. And I have to turn off my scanner, stop live streaming, and quit this project. Now, this is not for any legal reasons. I'm not being hassled by the police or anything like that. Actually, what's happening is the St. Paul Police Department is going encrypted. So they are going to be using encrypted radios in the future, which I cannot listen to. The members of the public can no longer listen to. Scanner enthusiasts can no longer listen to. So era of journalists, curious citizens, and police watchdog organizations listening into police activities on the radio is kind of coming to an end. And with it, my scanner antennas up here on the roof are coming to an end because these are some of my last antennas that are still on the roof. If you'll notice in the background, most of my antenna farm has moved to the garage. All of my satellite antennas, most of my ham radio type stuff has moved over to the garage. That's still a work in progress, but this is one of the last antennas I still had here on the house because the audio server is here in the house, the scanner lives here in the house, and I just have not moved any of this equipment. But now that everything is going encrypted and I can no longer hear the police radios with these, I'll probably be removing this antenna sled from the roof of my house. Actually, I do have one other antenna on here that's still active, this directional Ubiquiti Wi-Fi bullet. This thing is pretty old. This thing has probably been up here just as long as the scanner antenna. It is all sun faded, it's kind of worn out, but it does still work, and it's hooked up to this directional panel antenna. And that beams over to the bird coop so I can keep an eye on the security cameras over there. And this little antenna sled is kind of fun. It's just an aluminum structure that I made out of scrap aluminum that I found at some auction, weighed down with cinder blocks. It has not blown away yet. I had an older setup. Originally, I think when I set this up on the house, it was less secure and it did blow over occasionally. And it does still have a little bit of wiggle, so if a big storm comes along, it'll wobble a bit, but it's been pretty secure for almost 12 years now. And my little Radio Shack Pro 96 scanner here has also lasted over 12 years. It has outlasted Radio Shack. It has outlasted several servers that it's been hooked up to. The Shuttle Mini PC here is my current web server and audio streaming server, and it's got a few issues, which is also part of why I'm shutting this down. But this is actually the second server set up for this audio stream. The original one was a broken IBM ThinkPad with no screen. I didn't need much power or really server capacity for this. It's just a live streaming audio setup going out to Radioreference using a dark ice script on Linux. And yeah, this old shuttle thing works well enough for that. Now I also have the scanner piped into a little monitor speaker so I can actually listen to what's going on if I want to listen in real time. Some other things that I have hooked up to this are a audio filter. So this is a ground loop isolator to try and keep some noise out of the system. And then everything else is just RCA cables going to a little headphone jack here. And this is the antenna wire, antenna cable going up to the roof. The Pro 96 scanner is just permanently powered from a wall jack, and it's basically been on for over 12 years, aside from the occasional power outage. And this system is on a UPS, so even power outages don't affect it as much. But yeah, basically this thing has been running for 12 years. That's pretty good for a little scanner. If Radio Shack were still around, I would recommend people buy this scanner. But unfortunately, the company wasn't as robust or long-lived as some of their products. As a little bit more background here, the St. Paul Police Department, as with most Twin Cities metro area emergency responders, uses something called the ARMOR Trunking Network. It's an acronym, I believe, standing for Allied Radio Matrix for Emergency Responders, something like that. I might be misremembering the exact acronym, but The St. Paul Police use it, Minneapolis Police, fire departments, public works, basically any local government organization is in the Armor network, and it's a statewide network, so they can intertie with state patrol, they can intertie with outlying communities, with towns out farther in Minnesota, and also I believe with some surrounding states. A lot of agencies around the US and around the world are going to digital trunking systems, or they already have, because again, this is over 12 years old. This was a fairly new system 12 to 15 years ago. Before that, a lot of agencies used regular analog radios, the kind you would use an old style radio scanner for, but a trunking radio system is a little bit more complicated because you have kind of computer assigned channels. You have multiple working channels and then a central control channel, and when you key up a radio, the computer system basically negotiates using that control channel what other channels are open. It assigns your radio and the person you're talking to off onto a working channel, and it does that all dynamically. And that basically frees up a lot of the dispatcher's job. They no longer have to juggle a lot of traffic from a big police department. They no longer have to assign different channels to different cars, to different units. That all happens automatically. And the dispatcher can just focus on calling up a unit, sending out a dispatch message saying we've got a problem at such and such address, and that works for both police, for fire, even for public works. So you can have the dispatcher send out different assets to a particular problem, and the Armor system, the digital trunking system, just handles a lot of the bookkeeping back end of the actual radio system automatically. And encryption is kind of a easy option with digital trunking. It can be turned on and off at the will of the agencies. Now, a lot of agencies here in Minnesota did not use encryption for a long, long time, unless they were doing something particularly sneaky like drug enforcement, like SWAT team stuff, things that they didn't necessarily want the news media to hear about. They didn't necessarily want members of the public to hear about, because maybe a criminal could use that radio scanner to find out when the SWAT team was coming, or find out when the drug enforcement bust was coming. But laws and policies change, and nowadays everything is going encrypted, not just the police department, but apparently also the fire department. And part of that is due to privacy, because you don't necessarily want to be broadcasting things like, oh, John Smith at 123 Fake Street has overdosed on cocaine, and now if anybody is listening to the scanner, they know that John Smith uses cocaine. There's a lot of potential issues with just anybody out there being able to listen to police scanners. Now, 12 or 15 years ago, part of that was solved by just having a digital trunking system, which was harder to pick up. You couldn't hear that system easily on most consumer-grade scanners. You had to get something like the Radio Shack Pro 96, which was very expensive. Back when I bought it, I think this was $200, $250. Again, that was like 15 years ago. These days, almost everything does digital trunking, and you can even do it with a couple SDRs, software-defined radios, so it is much less security by obscurity the way it was over a decade ago. Now, radio scanning and listening in on police radios has a pretty long history in the US. I have some old scanner equipment kicking around. In fact, I have one here in my little fallout shelter corner, kind of showing off what somebody might have in their fallout shelter back in the 1970s, 1960s to listen to public safety, find out information that might not be generally available on public radio stations. If you want to know the real scoop of what's happening in an emergency, you would want a police scanner in your fallout shelter, in your house, in your cabin, in your car maybe. Now, there are some rules and regulations about that. In Minnesota, for example, it is illegal to have a radio capable of receiving police communications in your car, unless you have a ham license, which I do, so I can carry a portable scanner like this around. And actually, this one is too old to receive modern police radio communications. It could receive some kind of backwoods county sheriffs and whatnot, but metro area police and fire won't pick up on this, because this is not digital and not a trunking system. This is just another old Radio Shack scanner that I picked up. Actually, this was at Axeman Surplus for $8. So yeah, you can find older scanners these days for almost nothing, because they're a little less capable. They don't pick up as much of the currently active police and fire. You can still hear some stuff like airband, ham radio stuff, weather, marine stuff, but for police and fire, these are kind of outdated now. Yeah, here's another even older one I found at Axeman. I was going to do a little video on these because I keep collecting them. This one is was $2.95, and it only has 4 channels. They're probably crystal controlled, much like my base station Bearcat scanner over there in the fallout shelter pile. This would use crystals like these little modules here. So if you wanted to go to a different frequency, you would have to buy different crystals. I started in the radio scanning hobby a long time ago. When I was a kid growing up in Alaska, we almost always had radios on in the house. We were listening to CB radio, we were listening to Marine VHF, and we would always hear Coast Guard calls. You could follow along with emergencies. And that was always really interesting, and it was a way to kind of keep informed with what was going on in the world, what was going on in our local area with weather, with emergencies, with distress situations, and sometimes we would even be able to help out with those distress situations because we would be the closest ones to a vessel in distress because we lived outside of town on an island. When I went off to college, I picked up a Radio Shack desktop scanner, and I would listen to that thing just all the time. I basically had that on at all times in my dorm room in college. I would listen to the campus police, the fire department, even the local military base. It was very interesting. I would also listen to the railroad. I would listen to just any agency I could get my hands on, and I would hear all kinds of interesting stuff. And occasionally I would take my bike out and go out to look at something I heard about, like a train derailment or a car on fire. That was kind of interesting. Somebody had bought one of the really cheap plug-in block heaters and burned down their Jeep. I would also hear all the local emergency gossip on campus, like if somebody was getting arrested for trying to smuggle booze into the freshman dorm or was injured somehow. I wasn't trying to be too voyeuristic, but it was just interesting to know about that, and it felt like a way to really keep in touch with what was going on around me, what was going on in my local community, just finding out things that would maybe never get into the newspaper, or finding them out before they got into the newspaper, or in some cases finding them out and putting them into the newspaper. I have another video on my channel about a fire training situation which got a little bit out of hand on campus, and I was able to kind of be on scene and film it for both the local campus TV station and then write an article for the campus newspaper because I was right there and I got footage of both the training scenario and the unintentional aftermath. If you're interested in that, I'll put a link to the video. It's all like early 2000s kind of potato quality footage, so it may or may not be that interesting. Now, my actual in-person scanner listening has kind of petered out over time. I just don't have time to have a scanner on all the time, but it was nice to live stream the scanner to Radioreference because doing so gave me kind of premium access to Radioreference. So I could listen to my own recordings, I could listen to other people's recordings, which were very cool, and it was just cool to be able to share that information out to the wider world. Even if I wasn't personally listening to it all the time, anybody in the world could tune into my live stream and listen to what St. Paul PD, St. Paul Fire Department were up to. Now, I was running this stream, like I said, since about 2013, and some unintentional consequences came out of that. Because my stream was public, anybody could tune into it, and because mine was one of the better ones, there were a couple other people streaming St. Paul Police, but they didn't have as good of antennas or as good of scanners. Mine, for a long time, was one of the better ones, and it developed a little bit of a following. Apparently there was a Facebook group of concerned citizens, which always seemed to be suburban citizens complaining about crime in the city, but there was this whole Facebook group of people who would listen to my scanner and just comment on it, like, oh no, there's crime in the city, and shootings and muggings and this and that. And I always thought it was a little bit silly. I moved here from the middle of nowhere. I expected there to be crime. It's a city. All cities have crime. Suburbs have crime. The middle of nowhere even has crime where I grew up, but it was usually juvenile delinquent bears instead of humans. I started to get some kind of weird messages on the email forward from this scanner live stream. I would get people saying strange things, asking me to do things about the scanner, asking me to maintain it better, to kind of demanding actually that I maintain it better. This was completely a hobby project, completely free. I wasn't charging anybody for it. I wasn't trying to make any money from it, but people apparently had expectations about it and would hassle me to improve it, make it better, give them what they wanted, which, yeah, that could be a little bit annoying, especially when I was on vacation, and it inevitably seemed like it broke when I was on vacation, when I couldn't just run downstairs and reboot the thing. So I'd be out in California or someplace, and I would get this stream of emails saying, oh, your scanner's offline, you need to fix it, there's a crime wave, this and that. It's like, whatever, get your own scanner, guys. I even had people asking me if I could make the cops speak more clearly. It's like, no, that's not how it works, guys. With a digital radio system like this, there is some compression, and human voices do sound a little weird. So if you're an older person listening to a scanner like this and you're familiar with an analog radio scanner, it does sound different. The voices sound a little clipped, they sound a little compressed, and that's just because the system is efficient. It's cutting out of unnecessary vocal frequencies, cutting them down to just what's necessary. Anyway, I tried not to take the public feedback about my scanner too personally. I usually just laughed it off, and that's kind of why I haven't mentioned it on the channel here before. I've thought about showing off the setup. I've thought about talking about the technical aspects of running a dark eye script and a radio reference stream and live streaming police scanner stuff, but I haven't really wanted to get into it because I didn't really want Facebook concerned suburban to know who I was, to really connect the scanner stream with me personally. You know what, now that it's going encrypted, now that I'm shutting down the scanner system, I don't have to worry about it anymore. Now, the encryption is supposed to go into effect here this month, October of 2025, and I've actually stopped streaming already. Partly because of that, partly because I did have some technical issues with that server. It went down again when I was out of town. I didn't have time to fix it. You know, this is going encrypted anyway. I don't have time to maintain it. It's not really worth trying to maintain it if it's not going to be useful anymore. So I give up on it. And it's a little sad to give up on a project that I've been doing for over 12 years, but stuff changes, stuff moves on, and maybe now I can do something else. Maybe I can live stream something else interesting, like satellite content. Personally, I'm a little disappointed to lose a cool radio resource like police scanners, but yeah, I understand some of the security, some of the privacy concerns. I understand some of the reasons why they're going encrypted, but I do think it's a big loss for news media, for the general public who wants to stay informed, for people who are interested in keeping an eye on the police, making sure that they're staying ethical and supporting their community instead of doing other things that certain police departments have done that are less valuable to the community. And those are all things that are going to get harder now that the general public can't listen in on as many of these police radio streams. Anyway, that's about all I had for this video. I just wanted to do a little commentary on kind of the end of an era in police scanning and just show off something that I've put a lot of effort into for the last over a decade. And maybe now that this particular project has wound down, I will have some more free time and energy to do some other project. Maybe. I always keep myself pretty busy, so we'll see what happens. Finally, as usual, thank you to everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.